Have you ever felt something so deeply that it almost frightened you, as if your heart reacted before your mind had time to understand what was happening? You walk into a room and without a single word being spoken, you already know who's sad, who's pretending, who's holding something painful behind their smile. You feel the temperature of people's emotions like weather, shifting, heavy, warm, cold, all of it landing directly on your skin. And while others move through life untouched, you find yourself carrying worlds inside your chest that no one else even notices. You sense heartbreak in places where others feel mild discomfort. A quiet sigh from someone you love feels like a storm echoing through your ribs. A slight change in tone feels like a warning siren that keeps echoing hours after the conversation has ended. Your emotional depth makes you see things before they're spoken, understand things before they're explained, and feel truths that people haven't even admitted to themselves. You notice the details most people overlook: the trembling in a voice, the forced laugh at the wrong moment, the way someone's eyes shift when they're trying not to break. It's not sensitivity, it's an unfiltered connection to the world. You might remember being a child standing in the doorway while your mother sat at the edge of her bed. She didn't cry, she didn't complain, she didn't tell you anything was wrong, but you felt it. A heaviness, a quiet ache filling the room like smoke. You walked closer without knowing why, and she smiled at you the way adults do when they don't want their children to see their sadness. But you saw it anyway, and ever since then, you've been someone who feels the truth in everything, even when that truth hides behind silence. Or maybe you're the adult now, sitting across from someone pretending to be fine, while inside your chest a single sentence could collapse your entire composure. You swallow emotions with a practiced grace because you've always been the strong one, the listener, the absorber, the one who feels too much but shows too little. Psychologists say some people possess heightened emotional attunement, stronger mirror neuron responses, deeper limbic activation, a nervous system wired to sense subtle shifts. But science rarely captures the full picture, because what you experience is not just neurological. It's spiritual, intuitive, ancestral, almost mythic in its intensity. And yet, beneath this depth lies a quiet ache, because feeling so much is both a blessing and a wound, a gift and a curse, a superpower and a burden you didn't choose, which raises the question that will follow you into the next chapter. Where did this emotional intensity begin? And why were you wired to feel the world this deeply long before you even understood it? Have you ever wondered why you could sense tension in a room before you were even old enough to understand the words being spoken? Why you felt responsible for emotions that were never yours to carry? It begins earlier than you think. Not in adulthood, not in adolescence, but in the quiet, impressionable years when your nervous system was still learning the language of the world. Picture a small child sitting at the edge of a dimly lit living room. The adults are arguing softly, not loudly enough to frighten the average child, but intensely enough that every shift in tone slices through the air like a blade. Most children would continue playing, unaware of the emotional storm gathering around them. But you didn't. You listened, you observed, you absorbed. Your chest tightened long before the voices rose. You felt the temperature in the room change before a single harsh sentence was spoken. You didn't know the meaning of the words, but you knew the meaning of the pain. Psychologists call children like this highly attuned, their attachment systems hypersensitive, their mirror neurons firing more intensely than most. In homes where unpredictability or emotional inconsistency existed, these children developed anxious or fearful attachment patterns, not because they were weak, but because their survival depended on constant emotional scanning. Your brain learned early that the only way to stay safe was to understand the adults around you better than they understood themselves. Maybe you remember moments like this, standing near the kitchen as your mother wiped her eyes quickly when she heard your footsteps. You didn't have the vocabulary for heartbreak, disappointment, or exhaustion, yet you felt every one of those emotions in your own tiny body. Without knowing it, you stepped closer, offering a small hand or a quiet presence, becoming a comfort long before you ever received one in return. You learned to soothe others, not because you were taught to, but because you couldn't bear the weight of their unspoken sadness. This is where emotional over-responsibility is born. A child who becomes the emotional barometer of the home grows into someone who believes it's their job to keep everyone calm, happy, safe. A child who watches for danger in voices grows into an adult who anticipates pain before it happens. A child who feels everything becomes someone who overthinks everything. And this is the quiet tragedy. The sensitivity that kept you safe as a child becomes the mask you wear as an adult. The mask that hides your needs, your exhaustion, your unspoken wounds. But every mask has an origin, and every mask has a cost. And eventually, that cost reveals itself in ways you never expected. And this is where the story turns next. Have you ever wondered why, despite feeling everything so intensely, you've become so good at pretending that nothing touches you at all? It's strange, isn't it? How the child who felt too much eventually grows into an adult who hides almost everything, as if somewhere along the way, you learned that your emotions were too heavy for the world, so you folded them quietly into the shadows of your own chest. You become the person who listens more than you speak, the friend who absorbs the weight of other people's stories without ever sharing your own, the partner who gives reassurance you never receive. You walk through life like an emotional sponge, soaking up everyone's fear, sadness, and confusion, while offering them clean, calm comfort in return. And yet, when it comes to your own storms, you retreat inward as if you owe the world silence instead of truth. There's a moment most people overlook, the instant you put on that invisible mask. Maybe it happened the first time someone told you you're overreacting, when your heart was simply responding with honesty. Or perhaps it was when you learned that your sadness made people uncomfortable, that your sensitivity was inconvenient, that your needs were too much. And so, without meaning to, you began to place the oxygen mask on others first, gasping quietly behind your carefully controlled smile. You become the reliable one, the strong one, the emotionally intelligent one, roles that sound noble but feel like chains. You tell yourself it's easier to be the helper than the helped, the healer than the hurting, but beneath that calm exterior lives something raw and trembling. The monster within, not a monster born of cruelty, but one shaped by unspoken exhaustion, an accumulation of feelings you never allowed yourself to release. This inner creature is not dangerous, but overwhelming, a storm you keep locked behind ribs that learn too early how to hold everything together. Psychologists call this emotional suppression a survival adaptation. The brain learns a simple rule in childhood. If expressing your emotions leads to disapproval or abandonment, then hiding them becomes the safest path. Your nervous system, shaped by years of hyperattunement, continues scanning for threats even in adulthood. You anticipate others' needs before your own. You say yes when every fiber of your being wants to say no, and afterward you carry guilt for even imagining choosing yourself. This is the paradox of the deep feeler. You experience life with breathtaking intensity, yet no one truly sees the depth because you've learned to bury it beneath a flawless mask. But masks don't form in isolation. They form from wiring, from patterns, from the architecture of your nervous system itself. And to understand why you continue to feel the world so fiercely, you must look at what science reveals about minds like yours. Have you ever wondered why your emotions hit you like waves, while others seem to stand untouched beside the same storm? Why a single expression, a tremor in someone's voice, or an unspoken tension can send your heart into overdrive while the people around you barely notice? It's not imagination, it's not weakness, it's wiring, etched into your nervous system long before you had the words to describe it. Researchers call this trait high sensitivity, found in about 15 to 20% of people. Individuals like you have a more active network of mirror neurons, the brain cells responsible for empathy and emotional resonance. When someone near you feels sadness, your brain doesn't just observe it, it mirrors it, internalizes it, processes it, as if the emotion were your own. You aren't too sensitive. Your brain is simply tuned to a higher frequency, one that picks up emotional signals most people filter out. Neuroscience goes deeper. Your amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system, reacts more intensely to subtle cues: a raised eyebrow, a sudden silence, a shift in tone. Studies show that deep feelers experience greater amygdala activation during emotional situations, meaning you feel emotional intensity not just mentally, but biologically. Your body responds faster, stronger, deeper. Your vagus nerve, which regulates your sense of safety and calm, is often more reactive as well. It tightens during conflict, softens during connection, and sends signals through your entire body. This is why you might feel anxiety in your stomach, empathy in your chest, or heartbreak in your throat. It's interoception, the ability to feel your internal world with unusual clarity. And then there's emotional contagion, the phenomenon where emotions spread between people. For most, it's mild. For you, it's overwhelming. A friend's pain becomes your pain. A stranger's tension becomes a knot in your own spine. You carry emotions like fresh ink, absorbing what the world spills around you. Some psychologists believe this depth once served an evolutionary purpose. In early human tribes, individuals who were more attuned to emotional shifts could sense danger sooner, detect conflict earlier, recognize deception, or strengthen social bonds. Emotional depth wasn't a flaw, it was a survival mechanism, a quiet form of intelligence that protected entire communities. Yet even the strongest traits cast long shadows. Feeling deeply helps you understand the world, but it also exposes you to wounds others never notice. You carry heartbreaks that weren't yours. You sense storms that never arrive. You anticipate pain that never fully forms. And this is where the story turns toward the darker side of profound sensitivity, the part where emotional depth becomes emotional burden, and the gift you carry begins to feel like a weight only you can feel. Have you ever felt your own mind turn against you, not through cruelty, but through sheer intensity, as if every emotion arrives louder, sharper, heavier than it should? There comes a moment when emotional depth, once a quiet superpower, begins to feel like an endless flood that rises faster than you can breathe. And suddenly what once made you understanding now leaves you exhausted, hollow, and quietly hurting, in ways no one around you notices. You start overthinking conversations long after they end, replaying sentences like broken film reels. A tone, a pause, a misplaced word becomes a clue your mind won't stop examining. You lie awake at night, analyzing what you felt, what they felt, what could have been meant beneath what was said. Your thoughts spiral not because you want them to, but because your emotions cling to every detail, like vines wrapping around your ribs. The exhaustion hits in waves. You spend your day absorbing the moods of others, the sadness in a coworker's eyes, the frustration in a loved one's silence, the bitterness in a stranger's posture. You feel it all, and while others brush these moments off, the impressions remain stuck inside you like invisible bruises. You can sense when someone is hurting, but you can never unfeel what you sensed. There's a story behind this fatigue, a deep feeler sitting across from someone who begins to open up about their pain. You listen with full presence, offering empathy that feels like a blanket around their shaking hands. And by the end of the conversation, they leave lighter, while you walk away, carrying a weight that isn't yours. This happens again and again until the emotional sponge inside you becomes soaked, heavy, dripping with a sadness you can't name. This is the shadow side. You become a magnet for broken people, not because you seek them, but because they sense something in you. A softness, a warmth, a depth that feels safe to fall into. They come to you for healing, for understanding, for comfort. But where do you go? Who absorbs your storms? Who carries your oceans? Slowly, self-neglect appears like a quiet shadow, following you everywhere. You check on everyone except yourself. You soothe others' fears while ignoring your own. You offer compassion you never receive. And over time, the emotional burnout grows into something darker. A loneliness masked by kindness, a depression hidden behind wisdom, a storm disguised as strength. This is the unseen cost of feeling too much. The world benefits from your depth while you drown quietly beneath it. And yet, society rarely acknowledges this pain. In fact, it often conditions you to keep carrying it, praising your sensitivity while expecting you to hide the suffering it creates. a contradiction that leads us into the next truth you must confront. Have you ever noticed how the world praises emotional intelligence in theory, yet punishes emotional depth in practice? It's a strange paradox. Society loves the idea of empathy, compassion, intuition, but when you actually live those qualities, people look at you as if you're too much, too intense, too emotional for the pace of modern life. You begin to realize that the world is far more comfortable with numbness than with truth. From a young age, you were taught subtle lessons about your emotional world. When you cried deeply, someone said, "Stop being so sensitive." When you expressed hurt, you heard, "You're overreacting." When you hesitated because something felt wrong, people insisted, "Don't be dramatic." And every time a feeling was dismissed, a part of you learned to silence yourself just a little more. Gender only intensified this pressure. If you were a boy who felt deeply, you were told to toughen up, to hide softness, to become a fortress even when your heart was breaking inside. If you were a girl who felt too much, you were called emotional, unstable, dramatic, as if sensitivity were a flaw written into your nature. These messages carved themselves into your identity, teaching you that emotion is something to be contained, not expressed, tolerated, not understood. And as you grew, the world around you became even less forgiving. Workplaces reward those who detach quickly, who make decisions without hesitation, who ignore discomfort and move forward regardless of emotional cost, while you, who feel the weight of every interaction, are seen as overthinking, too hesitant, or too empathetic for environments built on speed rather than humanity. The world applauds efficiency, not introspection. It values productivity over presence, performance over authenticity. Even in relationships, your depth becomes misunderstood. Some partners admire your sensitivity at first, but later grow uncomfortable with the intensity of your feelings. Friends come to you for emotional support, yet rarely stay to understand your own inner storms. You become the emotional backbone for everyone except yourself, quietly punished for caring too much, absorbing too much, noticing too much. Philosophically, it's no surprise. Modern culture is obsessed with the idea of the strong individual, someone unbothered, unaffected, self-contained. But what is strength if not the courage to feel deeply in a world that fears emotion? What is emotional depth if not a form of truth in a society addicted to distraction? And yet, beneath the surface of these cultural expectations lies a deeper cost, one that slowly eats away at your inner world. Because when a person who feels intensely is forced to shrink, suppress, or silence their emotional reality, the consequences are not just psychological, they are existential. And it is this quiet damage, this long-term ache, that reveals itself in the next chapter, the emotional toll carried by the hearts that feel too deeply for the world they live in. Have you ever felt a kind of loneliness that didn't come from being alone, but from feeling everything more deeply than the people standing right beside you? It's a strange and heavy ache, the kind that settles into your ribs like quiet gravity. You move through the world carrying a heart that feels like it was built from thinner glass than everyone else's, a heart that cracks in places no one ever sees. Over time, the weight of emotional depth begins to carve itself into your life. You start doubting yourself, wondering if your reactions are wrong, if your sensitivity is unnatural, if your pain is unreasonable. You try to shrink your emotions, fold them into smaller versions of themselves, but all that does is press the hurt deeper into your chest. You smile while drowning. You offer light while sitting in your own darkness. You say, "I'm fine," with a voice that shakes just enough for the truth to leak through the cracks. There's a moment that repeats itself in the life of every deep feeler, a silent breakdown often invisible to others. It happens late at night, when the world is asleep and the emotional storms you absorbed during the day finally demand space to be felt. Your body shakes, not dramatically, but quietly, like a tree trembling in the wind. You don't cry because you're weak. You cry because you carry too much. Because for every heartbreak that isn't yours, your heart still bleeds a little. Psychologists say chronic emotional attunement leads to burnout. The nervous system gets overwhelmed, the mind becomes overloaded, the body keeps score of every unspoken wound. Anxiety slips into your daily rhythm. Self-doubt becomes the echo that follows every decision. Emotional isolation grows, not because you lack people, but because you lack the kind of understanding that makes you feel seen. And the irony is painful. The person who understands everyone else ends up feeling misunderstood by almost everyone. You love deeply, but you also hurt deeply. You care intensely, but you also break easily. Your emotional world is a garden that grows without water. Wild, beautiful, overgrown, and exhausting to maintain alone. You want someone to meet you where you stand, to feel with you instead of at you. But most of the time, you learn to carry the weight yourself, because asking for help feels like adding another burden to a world that already misunderstands your sensitivity. And yet, somewhere in that heaviness lies a quiet truth. Depth doesn't exist only to break you. Beneath the emotional exhaustion, there is a path, one that doesn't ask you to feel less, but to feel differently. A path that turns your sensitivity into strength, your wounds into wisdom, your depth into something sustainable. And that path begins with learning how to care for the heart you've been forced to carry alone. Have you ever wondered what life would feel like if your sensitivity wasn't a battlefield, but a form of quiet strength? If instead of drowning in your emotions, you learned how to breathe beneath them, not by becoming colder, but by becoming wiser. Healing for someone like you isn't about feeling less. It's about learning how to hold your depth without letting it break you. It begins with boundaries, not the harsh, defensive kind, but the gentle kind that feel like oxygen. You know that moment when someone enters your life with heavy energy, and you feel your chest tighten because you're already absorbing what they haven't even spoken. Boundaries are the silent space that remind you. Their feelings are not your responsibility. You can care without carrying. You can listen without losing yourself. A boundary is not a wall. It is the doorway through which you decide what your heart can safely hold. You also learn the art of self-regulation, the ability to soothe the storms inside you. A deep feeler's nervous system is like a sensitive instrument, tuned to pick up the faintest emotional frequencies. So you teach yourself small rituals, breathing that calms the racing mind, grounding that brings you back into your body, stillness that reminds you the world is not ending just because your emotions are loud. Neuroscientists call this emotional labeling, naming what you feel so the amygdala softens, the panic loosens, and the mind regains clarity. This is sadness. This is fear. This is old pain being triggered again. Naming it helps you navigate it. Another shift comes from detaching from emotional responsibility, no longer being the savior in every room, the healer in every conversation, the quiet carrier of unspoken pain. You begin to understand that empathy does not mean rescue. Compassion does not mean sacrifice. Love does not mean self-erasure. You stop apologizing for needing space. You stop feeling guilty for not fixing someone else's wounds. You start honoring the truth that your emotional bandwidth is finite, and preservation is not selfish. It is survival. And slowly, something changes. You begin choosing environments that honor your depth. People who speak gently, spaces where emotions are not ridiculed, relationships where you don't have to pretend your heart is smaller than it is. You realize your sensitivity is a compass. It guides you toward what nourishes you and warns you against what drains you. When directed inward, emotional depth becomes a kind of inner fire, warm, steady, illuminating. You were never meant to feel less. You were meant to feel truthfully, but without losing yourself in the process. And this brings us to the final question, the one that lingers long after the healing begins. What does it mean, philosophically and spiritually, to carry a heart that feels more deeply than the world knows how to hold? Have you ever realized that the reason you feel so deeply is because you see more than most people ever will? For you, emotion isn't just something that happens inside the body. It is a language, a landscape, a form of vision. While others walk through life seeing only what's visible, you sense the invisible currents flowing beneath everything. The quiet grief behind someone's smile, the unspoken longing in their gaze, the fear no one else pays attention to. You don't just feel the world, you perceive it. There's a kind of wisdom hidden inside that sensitivity. The wisdom of someone who carries entire universes behind their ribs. You notice the micro moments, the gentle shifts, the fragile truths that slip through the cracks of ordinary life. And even though this emotional clarity sometimes hurts, it also reveals beauty in places others overlook. You see meaning in silence. You hear stories in people's pauses. You feel connections that exist long before words are spoken. Your heart has always been more than an organ. It has been a mirror, reflecting not only your own emotions, but the quiet truths of everyone you meet. That's why your love feels so intense. That's why your empathy feels like a force of nature. You move through the world with an inner sensitivity that acts like a lantern in the dark, illuminating corners most people never even turn toward. And yes, that lantern sometimes burns you, but it also shows you what life really is. The pain you carry doesn't mean you are weak. It means your soul refuses to turn numb. It means you're alive in a world that often chooses sleep. It means you care in a time when indifference has become a shield. Emotional depth isn't fragility, it's consciousness, it's awareness, it's the ability to feel reality without filters. And when you think back on your life, the childhood moments when you sensed sadness before you understood sadness, the adult moments when you held others together while quietly falling apart, you begin to see the pattern. You weren't made to be ordinary. You weren't built for surface-level living. Your emotional intensity is not a curse. It is a testament to how profoundly you are connected to existence itself. So maybe the question was never, why do you feel so much? Maybe the real question is, how could you possibly feel any less when your soul sees this much? Because a heart that feels too much is a soul that sees too much. And that vision, however heavy, is its own kind of light, a quiet, enduring light that continues guiding you forward, even when the world cannot understand the brightness you carry.